Hello everyone, Christina here. Welcome to another card video. Today I'm going to be sharing you two different ways to use Distress ink with Embossed Resist. It's actually a few different ways. This first one, I'm using this beautiful background stamp from Simon Says Stamp, and I'm stamping it onto some smooth white cardstock. This is Neenah Classic Crest Solar White, and it's a great cardstock for this particular technique. I'm using some embossing ink from Simon as well. My preferred embossing ink is Versamark, but my pad is dry, as you've seen in recent videos. So I'm using the Simon Says Stamp embossing ink, which is also really great. I'm coating that embossed stamped image in white embossing powder. This is Alabaster from Brutus Monroe. Hitting that with my heat tool until all those lines are smooth and melted, and you know they're melted when they're a little bit glossy. So just tip it in the light and you can see when it's done. While I've got my MISTI stamp positioning tool out and on my work surface, I'm going to be stamping my second example as well. I'm using the So Beautiful stamp from Simon, and this is also a cling stamp. This time I'm going to be stamping it onto some Arches watercolor paper. So for the first example, I'm using regular cardstock, and for the second example, I will be using watercolor paper. So I'm doing the same steps, stamping that large stamp in that embossing ink from Simon Says Stamp, and then coating it in Alabaster embossing powder from Brutus Monroe, tapping off the excess, and then hitting that with a heat tool until all the lines are smooth and melted. And when you're melting embossing powder on watercolor paper, kind of move around quickly, don't stay in one spot too long. You don't want the powder to melt into the paper. For my first example on that smooth white cardstock, I'm using 4 different colors of Distress ink. This first color is Stormy Sky, and I'm using some ink blender brushes from Honeybee Design. I'm blending in these colors kind of really softly at first. I will intensify them a little bit later. This is Shaded Lilac. I'm bringing that in kind of next to those blue sections. And this is an example of Emboss Resist. The heat embossing, like I mentioned earlier, when you tip it in the light, it has that glossy finish. It has a very slick surface to the lines. So when you apply this water-based ink on top, it resists any of that ink. It's like the plastic coating of the embossing powder protects the white paper underneath. So even if you use clear embossing powder, the clear embossing powder will resist as well, and all you see is the paper underneath. In this case, I used white embossing powder, so that ink just kind of slides right off of it. So I used some scattered straw and cracked pistachio as well, and then came back in and intensified some of those colors because I wanted to have a little more of that dark blue. So that's the first background. The second way I'm using Emboss Resist is on watercolor paper. So I'm going to be taking those same exact Distress ink colors, but this time I'm going to be using Distress re-inker bottles. So it's this very concentrated ink that you would use to put on those ink pads and make them a little bit more juicy. But I'm just going to be putting drops of this re-inker fluid directly onto this palette here. This is a palette from Art Impressions, and you only need the smallest little droplet of ink because it is so concentrated. You'll see they all look super dark right now, but yes, those are 4 different colors. I'm wetting the entire watercolor paper. I'm letting some of that water really soak in, and you don't want it too wet. You don't want like big puddles where the water's splashing everywhere. If you do have that, just go ahead and let the water kind of seep into the paper before you start painting. I'm using a number 10 watercolor brush, and I'm also going to put the stamp set off to the side so I can see a little bit better what those images are, just because everything's really white right now and I can't really see where the images are. Starting out with scattered straw, you can see as I bring this in, this is very concentrated in comparison to the ink that you would use with a blender brush. So this is a great way to get really strong color. It's so saturated and just deep color. Now I brought in some Shaded Lilac next to this yellow of the scattered straw that kind of mixed, made kind of a little muddy gray shade, not as bright and vibrant. So I'll revisit that area here after I've got a little more painting going. Stormy Sky is also a very intense blue when you're using the re-inker. And there's that Shaded Lilac. That's the bright purple I wanted. So I'm speeding up the video a little bit so you can see the entire painting, but I just started bringing in those drops of color, mostly using one color per flower, and then adding a bunch of green right over the stems and leaves. But I also wasn't afraid to put some, strong droplets of color. Like I put the stormy sky over that flower on the left edge that kind of went gray. I just added some blue on top and that sort of cleaned up the area. So there's so much concentrated color on this that I decided to tip up my board, let it kind of seep to the bottom, tilt it different directions, kind of get those colors moving a little bit. And I love that it has this sort of dripping effect, almost like the colors are spreading and dripping from the top. I think it has a really cool effect. So I hit that with my heat tool to dry everything. Once again, keep that heat tool moving. You don't want to remelt all of that embossing powder and have those lines go back into the paper. But after everything was dry, I came back in with just a little bit of each of these colors, and I wanted to emphasize the lines on the flowers. So I'm mostly adding kind of like where shading lines would be, keeping it very simple. I'm not blending it out or trying to get a nice transition. I want the harsh line of the watercolor. Just dropping in different sections to give a little bit more definition to each one of these flower shapes. So after I was done and everything was dry, I removed it from my board. And now I'm going to be assembling both of these backgrounds into cards. And you can see how different they are, even though I technically use the same thing. I use the distress ink, but one was just more concentrated than the other. I'm using two different die sets from Waffle Flower today. I've got the A7 layers dies for this larger piece, and then I'll be using the A2 layers dies for the smaller piece. I'm going to be making two different cards today. One will be 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and the other will be 5 by 7. So I use my dies and die cut those areas, just ran it through my Gemini Junior machine. And now I have these perfect pieces to go on my card fronts. So I'm also going to be using this die set from Kathy Zielske from CZ Design. I'm using the thank you dies and also some navy blue cardstock from Hero Arts. I think this is the color Nautical, maybe. I don't entirely remember. I'll have it linked down below in the video description and in the supplies at my blog if you're wondering about this specific blue cardstock. But I cut out the thank you out of that navy blue cardstock, and then I also cut it out of some of that same white cardstock that I used for the first example, and I cut it out 3 times. I'm going to be stacking these die cut words, 3 layers of the white all on top, and I'm using some Gina K Designs Connect glue for that. And then I'm taking the dark blue navy die cut and adhering that right on top. So it's giving it quite a bit of thickness, but when you look at the die cut from the side, you can see the white. It's a really cool effect. I've seen a lot of card makers do this, but I haven't ever tried it myself. I don't think I have anyway. Maybe with a metallic die cut on top, but not like this with just a solid cardstock color. So I adhered both of the words, thank you, to the front of that first ink blended background. And I just got those in place with some tweezers. And I also used a ruler to help line it up perfectly, make sure that it was straight on my background. For the other example with the watercolor, I used this reverse sentiments strips. What are they called? Reverse sentiment strips from Simon Says Stamp. And I used the Sentiment Labels die set from Simon as well. I heard this tip online that you can use the smallest die to cut out these little strips, and it's perfect. And it was so convenient. I got the greatest die cut, and I didn't have to worry about cutting it with a knife or a paper trimmer and possibly not cutting it perfectly. So I just kind of put that off to one side, use some washi tape to hold it in place, and then I have my strip. And it leaves the remaining sentiment strips within that sheet, and they stay all in place. I really loved that idea. So now I'm taking some foam adhesive. This is a very small, narrow strip of foam adhesive from Darice. I like that they're already pre-cut to these very narrow strips of foam tape. And I adhered that to my watercolor panel. So the last thing to do to finish these cards is put them on card bases. This watercolor piece was cut for an A7 card, so I've got some white cardstock here, and I am not shy when it comes to putting foam tape on the back of these panels to go onto my cards. If you've ever watched the Great British Baking Show, Mary Berry always says that when you're baking a pie, you don't want a soggy bottom. So I say when you're making a card, you don't want a saggy middle. So make sure you put plenty of foam adhesive on the center of your panels when you put it onto your card. There's nothing sadder than getting a card in the mail and it's beautiful, but the center of the card is all pressed in and it's looking pretty sad. So make sure you use foam tape. Thanks so much for watching today. I loved these two ways of using embossed resist, one with watercolor, kind of a watercolor effect, and the other with ink blending. Go ahead and give these a try. It's a lot of fun, and Distress inks are perfect to use for both of these techniques because it's a water-based ink. It's lovely for all of this. Thanks for watching. I will see you guys in another video very soon.